Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is James Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 7 running back rankings for the 2024 fantasy football season. The schedule is pretty simple. We're going to begin by talking about running back matchups in regards to which defenses are allowing the most fantasy points per game on average over the course of this season thus far, in order to identify the most advantageous or perhaps the most disadvantageous matchups going into Week 7. After which, we'll transition to talking about my top 40 running back rankings, as I'll share with you guys statistics in order to justify the rankings going into this week. Do not forget, rankings are always subject to change. There's a reason why I live stream every single day and also on Sunday mornings. This upcoming Sunday morning, we do have another London game. The stream will begin at 6 a.m. PST. So for those of you interested in getting updated rankings, be sure to swing on by. Outside of that, for those of you who are looking for my specific thoughts on a given player, you could travel down to the description of the video of this video and find the timestamps while you're down there. If they have not yet already, be sure to subscribe because again, we're live streaming every day. We're posting daily content in order to help you guys win a 2024 fantasy football championship. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin by talking about matchups at the position. As you guys can see to the right side of the screen, we've isolated running back rushing statistics allowed by each individual defense over the course of this season thus far, weeks 1 through 6. As we find it, the Carolina Panthers, Miami Dolphins, Los Angeles Rams, Cowboys, Patriots, etc. are the most advantageous matchups at the position. I mean, the Carolina Panthers in 6 games thus far have allowed 803 rushing yards and 12 rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs. In just the last 3 games, they have allowed 6 different running backs to surpass 14.5 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Bijan Robinson Jr., Austin Ekeler, and even Jeremy McNichols are going to be relevant options within the given week at the running back position. But nonetheless, just wanted to go ahead and present some of the more advantageous matchups at the position. We also want to talk about one of the matchups that we might want to avoid going into this week. For example, the Minnesota Vikings, the Ravens, the Chiefs, the Titans, all playing incredibly well against opposing running backs over the entire course of the season thus far. The Baltimore Ravens thus far this season are allowing the fewest yards per carry on average to opposing running backs, and also haven't allowed more than 46 rushing yards to a single running back this season. The 2 highest rushers against, the Baltimore Ravens this season, Isaiah Pacheco with 45 rushing yards and Chase Brown with 46. Again, these are some of the matchups that we want to be careful with, but either way, we'll refer to these over the course of today's episode. Outside of that, let's go ahead and let's transition into talking about my top 40 running back rankings, beginning with our number 1. It is King Derrick Henry, who's coming off of another consecutive game of 1 touchdown minimum. Again, that's 6 games in a row, and most recently against the Washington Commanders, 132 on the ground and 2 rushing touchdowns for over 25 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Not only that, not only has he had a consecutive streak of scoring touchdowns, in the last 5 consecutive games, he has surpassed over 90 total yards in every single contest. Again, they take on the Buccaneers, a defense that is allowing 4.62 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs, nearly 12 fantasy points per game within the category. But when you're talking about taking on the Baltimore Ravens, it doesn't matter how many points you allow. Expect Derrick Henry to have himself another incredible performance. He is quite literally an underdog pick'em cheat code. I use it every single week and I win money off of it. So be sure to go ahead and get him within a potential entry going into this week. Speaking of that entry, if you guys haven't checked out Underdog, there's a link down in the description at this current moment in time. If you travel to their website, use code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10. Not only are you going to be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, but you'll get my ranking sent to you every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings are by position, by tier, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, flex, half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings in order to help you set your lineups and, of course, help you get to a championship and potentially capture it in 2024. So for those of you who are interested in taking advantage of the opportunity, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility and potentially follow some of the pick 'em plays that we put together. Again, yesterday's hit, Sunday's hits, everything was pretty good in week 6, and hopefully we're going to continue that momentum going into this upcoming week and potentially starting on Thursday night with a new customer special of 0.5 total yards with Bo Nix. Thank you very much for all the support. All right, let's go to our number 2, Saquon Barkley. This, in my opinion, is the biggest rivalry game of the season. Now, a couple weeks back, we had DJ Moore taking on the Carolina Panthers. We had Stephon Diggs taking on the Buffalo Bills. But Saquon Barkley taking on the New York Giants in New York is the best rivalry game of the season thus far, and I'm extremely excited about the potential. Not only are the New York Giants allowing 4.87 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs, we have Saquon Barkley, who they did not want to pay this offseason. They thought he wasn't worth the investment for the future of their organization, and I would be very much so surprised if Saquon Barkley, who's coming off of a week in which he had 20 plus touches, doesn't get himself 25 rushing attempts against his former team. Everybody is going to be looking to try to stop Saquon Barkley. There are just too many weapons just to focus on Saquon Barkley. Therefore, I'm expecting Saquon Barkley to find himself a lot of success and a lot of opportunity within the matchup against this former team. Number 3, we have Kyren Williams, who's coming off of a bye week, a much-needed bye week, mainly because in the absence of Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp in the last 3 games, Kyren Williams has put this team on his back. And even though they haven't won many of these games, he has still been able to be a force within the running game. Over the course of the last 3 games, averaging 22 rushing attempts, 95 rushing yards per game, and 1.3 rushing touchdowns per game. Again, he has had 5 consecutive games of 1 touchdown minimum, and he only continues to develop into a better player every single week. Again, this week they take on the Las Vegas Raiders. It is one of the more advantageous matchups you can ask for. They're allowing over 15 fantasy points per game on the ground to rushing statistics isolated and 5.2 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. That's top 3 at the position. We're anticipating a huge week here from Kyren Williams. Again, another monster performance against a defense that cannot stop the run. Number 4, speaking of defenses that cannot stop the run, we have Jonathan Taylor. Now, this is under the assumption that he suits up and plays this week. That is the hope. If, in fact, he does not, then we'll talk about Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson as potential options as we get closer to Sunday. But as of right now, if Jonathan Taylor is available, we're firing him up against the Miami Dolphins. Again, Jonathan Taylor, in the last 3 consecutive games, has surpassed over a total of 100 yards every single time. Additionally, has scored 5 touchdowns in the last 4 games he has played while averaging a 4.85 yard per carry average. Now you have an opportunity of taking on the Dolphins, the second best matchup at the position, allowing over 21 fantasy points per game on the ground. The Dolphins will not have Tua Tagovailoa, so again, their offense will be, at points struggling and punting the ball over to Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson, who will be running the ball down their throat. Over the course of the season, these are the running back contributions against this defense thus far. Jacksonville, 117 and a touchdown. Buffalo, 106 and 2 touchdowns. Seattle, 102 and 2 touchdowns. Tennessee with 127 and 2 touchdowns. And the New England Patriots with 141 and a touchdown. They have allowed over 100 plus rushing yards and 1 touchdown minimum to every single backfield that they have taken on thus far this season. Anticipate over 100 and a touchdown for Jonathan Taylor if he's healthy and ready to go this week. Number 5 is Bijan Robinson, who finally got himself that breakout performance. Like we mentioned last week, the Carolina Panthers cannot stop the run, and we're glad that Bijan Robinson was able to take advantage of the opportunity on hand. But now he has to take advantage of the fact that he takes on the Seattle Seahawks, a defense that, quite frankly, cannot stop a soul within the running game. They're the 9th best matchup. They're allowing 5.27 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs, over 16 fantasy points per game on the ground alone. And not only that, the Atlanta Falcons, in comparison to the Seahawks, over the course of the last 3 games, the Falcons come out of the gate hot. In fact, in the last 3 games, they're averaging 18.66 points per game as an offense in the first half. While the Seattle Seahawks, on the other hand, in the last 3 games, as they have been on a 3-game slide of losing, they're only averaging 6.7 points per game in the first half. So if we're going to be in a situation where the Falcons take a commanding lead early because the Seattle Seahawks once again cannot produce in the first half of an overall contest, we're anticipating a lot of rushing upside from Bijan Robinson within the second half in order to kill the clock. Moving on to our number 6, we have Brian Robinson Jr. Now, I don't know whether or not he's going to be healthy by the time we get to Sunday, but we sure as hell are going to hope so, mainly because, again, he takes on the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers are the best matchup at the position, allowing over 25 fantasy points per game on the ground alone. Not only that, we have seen Chase Brown, Zack Moss, DeAndre Swift, Roschon Johnson, Bijan Robinson, and Tyler Algier, 6 different running backs in the last 3 weeks, score over 14.5 fantasy points in a contest against the Carolina Panthers. We are anticipating immediate success for Brian Robinson under the assumption he's healthy. Over the course of this season, averaging 14.66 fantasy points per game on 16.2 touches per game. So as long as he's healthy, the 14.5 fantasy points will exist, if not even more upside within the overall contest, considering how advantageous it is. Number 7, we have Breece Hall, who finally found himself an ample share of opportunity. 18 rushing attempts for $113, 5 receptions, on 6 targets for 56 receiving yards. And even though he got stuffed on the goal line and had many of opportunities to potentially score, going into this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, the opportunity share that is now going in the direction of Breece Hall with the offensive coordinator change, now being Todd Downing, a bigger emphasis on running the ball and less opportunities for Braylon Allen going forward, this only means more success for Breece Hall. Taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers, yes, it is a tough matchup at times, but ultimately we have seen running backs find success. Rico Dowdle just a couple weeks back. Therefore, I'm anticipating Breece Hall and this offense takes even further steps forward. Now that we have gotten the confirmation, exciting news earlier today, obviously a lot of trades that occurred, Amari Cooper ending up with the Bills, and of course Devontae Adams being sent to the Jets. This offense is elevated. They have an even better chance to move the chains, have more touchdown upside, and get Breece Hall into scoring situations on a more frequent basis in comparison to where they have been thus far this season. Number 8, we have Chuba Hubbard. So we got news earlier today from a report that said that Jonathan Brooks won't probably be returning until like week 9. So if that's going to be the case, Chuba Hubbard and his value continues to trend in the right direction. Again, Chuba Hubbard for another consecutive week, dominating. He has had 92 plus rushing yards in 4 consecutive games throughout that span of time, averaging 5.9 yards per carry. Additionally, has been able to get himself 4 or more receptions in each of the last 5 games. Takes on the Washington Commanders, the 7th best matchup at the position, allowing over 16.9 fantasy points per game. Again, they're allowing 5.3 yards per carry, which is top 5 in that overall category. And we're anticipating Chuba Hubbard to continue his reign of success. And especially considering there is no return of Jonathan Brooks for the near future, we're anticipating an advantageous matchup for him to go ahead and find himself success. And hopefully this week, find himself in the end zone once again. Moving on to our number 9. We have Kenneth Walker. Look, Kenneth Walker over the course of the last 3 games, since coming back from his injury, has seen so much receiving upside. It is unbelievable. This is something I did not anticipate, but I love the fact that he's getting himself so much implementation within this factor of the offense. Again, in the last 3 games, 19 total receptions, a ridiculous number. And considering the fact that the Seahawks have been in negative game scripts for 3 consecutive games, we're anticipating that this may continue for another consecutive week. I mentioned it earlier when I talked about Bijan Robinson. The Falcons as a team are averaging over 18.5 points per game in the first half over the course of the last 3 weeks. In comparison to the Seahawks over the course of the last 3 weeks, averaging less than 7 points per game in the first half. If this is going to be a one-sided affair early on, it may lead to a negative game script and a lot of receiving upside for Kenneth Walker. But if in fact Kenneth Walker can find himself a semblance of success on the ground, find himself with that touchdown upside like he has had multiple times over the course of the last couple weeks, we're anticipating a lot of success. Thus far this season, the Falcons have allowed 88 or more rushing yards to opposing running backs every single week. We're anticipating some success here from Kenneth Walker, to say the least. Number 10, we have Joe Mixon, who looked incredibly healthy against the New England Patriots. I thought, look, he hadn't had a single full practice prior to the game. Maybe he's not going to be unleashed completely. And even though they didn't unleash him completely, again, he only played 42% of the offensive snaps in the snaps that he was given. 13 carries for 102 and a touchdown, 2 receptions for 30, and a receiving touchdown. His efficiency in regards to yards per carry was up there mainly because of the explosive plays that he, went ahead and delivered for many of us in fantasy. He had himself receptions of 10 and 20 yards. He had himself rushes of 20 and 59 yards. Incredible overall burst. He looks fully healthy. And imagine, he only played 42% of the snaps in comparison to week 1, which was 76%. Just wait till they increase the overall snap counts and the overall numbers. And in a more competitive potential shootout matchup against the Green Bay Packers, I'm anticipating continued success for Joe Mixon within this offense. Moving on to our number 11, we have J.K. Dobbins, who again, for another consecutive game, has gotten himself 18 or more touches. And with Gus Edwards now on the injured reserve, obviously that took place prior to the week 6 overall matchup, we have more of a solidified backfield for J.K. Dobbins to continue to dominate within. Now, we know that Vidal ended up having himself a receiving touchdown within that game, but the overall snap share, the overall opportunity share, 25 total rushing attempts going in the direction of J.K. Dobbins, is only going to continue to build. This week, they take on the 6th best matchup at the position, allowing nearly 17.5 fantasy points per game. That is the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals have allowed the following rushing yards to opposing running backs in the last 4 games. 137 to Green Bay running backs, 111 to San Francisco, 169 to Washington, and 188 to the Detroit Lions. We're anticipating on Monday Night Football for J.K. Dobbins to find himself another successful week as a top 12 running back. Moving on to our number 12, we have Alvin Kamara. My only concern about Alvin Kamara is that there are so many injuries implicated within this offense that they may not be able to move the ball as efficiently as they want to. We are anticipating, considering the knee injury that Rashid Shaheed has, along with that, Chris Olave in the concussion protocol, Derek Carr also out. If all of their main weapons are out and Alvin Kamara is the only man standing, the only survivor left, of course, that means more target upside coming off of a week with, Spencer Rattler with 8 targets, 5 receptions, 24 yards. I mean, we could very easily see double-digit targets within the upcoming contest against the Denver Broncos, mainly because, again, when you want to attack the Broncos, it's very difficult to attack their overall cornerbacks and their secondary. They have very talented players in the back end. But when you go ahead and attack their run-stopping defense, that is where they can be exposed. And of course, you can always take advantage of Alvin Kamara's receiving upside out of the backfield against linebackers. Ultimately, as of late, we have seen the Los Angeles Chargers 112 and a touchdown against them on the ground. Las Vegas Raiders running backs 80 and a touchdown. Tampa Bay 91 yards. Pittsburgh 114. Seattle 115 and a touchdown. Teams find their most success against Denver's defense running the ball, and that's exactly what Alvin Kamara will be asked to do on Thursday night against their defense. Number 13, we have David Montgomery. Look, David Montgomery should be implicated to probably be a top 12 potential running back within the week, but understand, despite all of his consecutive successful weeks, this is 5 consecutive games this season in which he has scored 1 touchdown minimum. Not only that, he has scored 19 total touchdowns in the last 19 regular season games he has played. He's a touchdown machine, that is a given. But he takes on the most difficult matchup at the position. The Vikings are only allowing 6.9 fantasy points per game on average to opposing running backs on the ground. They are only allowing 3.7 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. I'm anticipating those numbers to increase, mainly because of the efforts of David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, and this offensive line. This is going to be a very competitive matchup, but I still anticipate David Montgomery to find himself success despite the difficult nature of it. Now, similar to him, I do anticipate that Jahmyr Gibbs will continue to find success. Now, even though David Montgomery is stealing touchdowns left and right as per usual, Jahmyr Gibbs still finds himself with a lot of success within the yardage counts. Over the course of the last 4 games, Jahmyr Gibbs has totaled 91, 78, 103, and 106 overall total yards. So if we're going to be in a conversation in which Jahmyr Gibbs is going to continue his streak of success, whether it's on the ground, through the air, finding himself an abundance of overall yardage, all he needs is a potential touchdown, and he's implicated for 15 plus fantasy points within the given week. And like I just mentioned it with David Montgomery, yes, this is a very difficult matchup. In fact, the most difficult matchup at the position. I'm anticipating success regardless of that fact based on the overall efforts of this offensive line and how incredible they have played thus far this season. Number 15, we have Chase Brown. Look, if we thought it was over a couple weeks back, now it's completely over. This was the first week in which Chase Brown has outsnapped Zack Moss, and not only that, Chase Brown was coming off of an injury. So everything is now in the direction of Chase Brown taking over this backfield and imposing his will this upcoming week against the Cleveland Browns. Again, now that he has claimed the RB1 status, we're probably going to see him continue to get himself, the last 3 weeks, 3 consecutive games of 12 or more touches. Those numbers are going to continue to increase on top of the fact that he has 3 consecutive games of 1 touchdown minimum. He takes on the Browns defense, which is the 13th best matchup on the ground, allowing over 15 fantasy points per game. They just lost Amari Cooper, trading him away to the Bills. That offense is far less valuable, even though the Cleveland Browns defense typically has Joe Burrow's number. I'm anticipating the run game to certainly be a factor with Chase Brown at the helm. Moving on to our number 16, we have Tony Pollard. Look, Tony Pollard has been significantly better than the number 16 overall spot. The only thing that provides concern for me is the fact that Will Levis is one of the worst quarterbacks in the National Football League. He literally had less than 100 total passing yards against the Colts of all defenses. So, this being said, Tyjae Spears is potentially expected to miss this week, which increases the value of Tony Pollard. We have Tony Pollard, who has had 4 of the last 5 games consist of 19 or more touches. He is a workhorse back in every sense of the word. He's taken on a defense that is allowing 4.94 yards per carry to opposing running backs and over 14 fantasy points per game on the ground. I'm anticipating him to find that kind of range, either 12 to 14 fantasy points in a half PPR within the upcoming matchup against this defense, which again, the defense is going to make, Will Levis struggle, and if it's a negative game script, Tony Pollard will still be able to find himself value through the air or on the ground, regardless of where he finds it. He'll be given the opportunity to succeed. Number 17 is Devon Achane. If you have an opportunity to trade for Devon Achane, this is the week to do so, because again, we got information earlier this week from Mike McDaniel, the head coach of the Dolphins, that he anticipates to see Tua Tagovailoa return in 2024. Now, ask exactly when that is going to take place. Again, after this week, his 4-week IR stint will have surpassed. Therefore, he could potentially play in week 8 or 9. Devon Achane at this current moment is a buy low candidate, mainly because the last time we saw him out, concussion protocol. Even though he has been highly inefficient without Tua Tagovailoa over the course of the last couple weeks, 24 carries and only 63 rushing yards, 2.6 yards per carry. This week, he takes on the Colts, the 11th best matchup, allowing nearly 16 fantasy points per game on average on the ground. We are anticipating a lot of success, mainly because, again, if Tony Pollard, who we just talked about a moment ago, put up 16 fantasy points, 93 on the ground and a touchdown, while Will Levis had less than 100 total passing yards in that game, I can only anticipate what Devon Achane could potentially, produce within this upcoming game, even having Tyler Huntley as his current quarterback. Again, the Titans had 24 attempts against the Colts defense for 122 yards and a rushing touchdown. Devon Achane should be implicated for a solid week here. So if you have an opportunity for trading for him now before Tua's return, it would be absolutely advantageous for you to do so. Number 18, we have Josh Jacobs. This is another consecutive game where he's getting 20 or more total touches. Now, touches are great, and typically they lead to success, but unfortunately was not able to find himself in the end zone. The 2 total opportunities that this offense had within the 5-yard line were both passing attempts. One that went in the direction of Dontavion Wicks, which was incomplete, and the other a 5-yard passing touchdown to Jaden Reed. Now, unfortunately, Josh Jacobs needs those touchdowns to be uber relevant within the fantasy football realm, especially in a half PPR. Even though he's getting himself the ample yardage, the ample touches, we want him to see, potential touchdown upside. This week, they do take on the Houston Texans. We have seen many of teams run the ball down this Texans' throat. Again, Buffalo 97 in a touchdown, Jacksonville for 140 on them, and Minnesota for 115 on the ground. So all you got to do is give Josh Jacobs, the opportunities, and hopefully in a high-scoring potential matchup here against these two high-powered offenses, we should see fantasy success. Number 19, we have Jordan Mason. Now, again, I don't know what the status of Jordan Mason is going to be by the time we get to Sunday, but the hope is that, of course, he's going to be given a chance to practice, get into a full participation, and we'll have a designation for sure by Sunday. Now, again, if you are a Jordan Mason manager, a Christian McCaffrey manager, Isaac Guerendo is on the waiver wire. We'll talk about him in just a moment because he will be ranked in the episode. But if Jordan Mason is going to be the clear and away starter, he starts for us, right? Because we know how much value he has. I mean, again, in just the first half of play, had 65 rushing yards while dealing with that shoulder injury. Could have very easily had himself over 150 yards and a touchdown within that given game. But again, it got cut short due to the injury. Obviously, it looked like it was a lot of pain management. Hopefully, he'll be ready to go. We'll keep an eye on his status. Outside of that, they do take on the Chiefs. The Chiefs are only allowing 3.06 yards per carry on average and 7.66 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. They are quite literally one of the toughest matchups you could possibly ask for. It is going to be difficult, but regardless, Jordan Mason has to start if he's active within the given week. Moving on to the next running back, we have Tank Bigsby. So, with Travis Etienne dealing with a hamstring injury and all the inconsistencies that he has dealt with, and the fact that they are still in London, now they have an opportunity of taking on the New England Patriots. This is one of the best matchups you could possibly ask for. And for those of you who went ahead and you picked up Tank Bigsby some point within the season, you will be able to, find yourself a lot of value with him this week and potentially beyond. Again, understand that last week, against the Chicago Bears, that game script got out of hand. And there was a reason why we saw a lot more D'Ernest Johnson, because they do trust D'Ernest Johnson more as a receiving back in comparison to Tank Bigsby. But in this week against the New England Patriots, in a positive game script in which they're able to effectively run the ball against quite literally the fifth best matchup at the position, the Patriots allowing over 17.5 fantasy points per game on the ground. Again, we have seen many of teams find success against this defense, and anytime the Jacksonville Jaguars have been in a positive game script, they give their running backs the ball a bunch on the ground. Specifically in week 1, leading that entire game against Miami, their running backs had 24 total rushing attempts. And in week 5 against Indianapolis, in that game where they had the lead for the majority of the game, 20 rushing attempts. We're anticipating somewhere between 18 to 20 plus attempts for Bigsby within the week, which is certainly going to lead to success against the Patriots run-stop defense. Number 21, we have James Conner. Look, James Conner didn't see a single touch in the fourth quarter. And that wasn't because, again, he wasn't performing well. It was just a matter of, the game got out of hand. They used a lot of Amari DeMercado and Trey Benson late in that game. But going forward into this weekend's matchup this upcoming Monday night matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers, we're anticipating more total touches. Again, 11 touches on 12 total opportunities is not the norm of James Conner. We have seen it going back to last season with this new offensive coordinator for the Arizona Cardinals that they want to give him the ball 18 plus times per game. We're going to get back to that taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. I anticipate for him to get himself the opportunity and hopefully able to find himself within the end zone this upcoming week. The only struggle is if, in fact, Kyler Murray isn't able to consistently move the ball down the field and they get behind early in the game, against a solid defense like the Los Angeles Chargers, it could be trouble. That's why I have him at number 21. Moving on to 22, we have Aaron Jones. Honestly, Aaron Jones can outproduce the number 22 overall number, but understand the reason why I have him here. The Detroit Lions matchup is one of, if not the most difficult matchup you can possibly have within a given week. Again, over the course of the season, only allowing 3.57 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. And even though we have seen Kenneth Walker have himself a dominant performance, Kenneth Walker and Christian McCaffrey, that's 2 of the last 25 performances from running backs of RB1s that we have seen find success. There hasn't been another running back in the last 2.5 years that has surpassed over 70 rushing yards outside of Kenneth Walker and Christian McCaffrey against this run-stop defense. Now again, losing Aiden Hutchinson is definitely going to play a factor within that run-stop defense, but nonetheless, Aaron Jones, if he wants to succeed, has to be in the receiving game. From weeks 2 through 4, got himself 4+ receptions and 35+ receiving yards every single game. He can find himself a lot of value in that overall circumstance, and if he somehow, some way gets lucky and finds himself scoring a touchdown Again, the rushing yardage total isn't going to be high. Aaron Jones has had his experiences against this run-stop defense. Again, Green Bay versus Detroit all these years, and has not found himself a lot of success. So he needs a touchdown and he needs the receiving game to keep him relevant within the overall week, assuming he's healthy, of course. Moving on to our 23, we have Kareem Hunt. Again, the last time we saw Kareem Hunt prior to the bye week against the New Orleans Saints, 27 rushing attempts for 102 yards and a touchdown for 18.2 fantasy points in a half PPR. If the Chiefs continue to focus on running the ball, taking on the San Francisco 49ers, we should see a lot of success, mainly because if we track back to the Super Bowl, in which the Chiefs took on the 49ers, Isaiah Pacheco in that game, 18 carries, 6 targets, 6 receptions, 24 total touches. If we're going to give Kareem Hunt 20 plus total touches once again for another consecutive game, which we shouldn't be surprised if that is the case, he should find himself an abundance of overall success within the offense. Moving on to our number 24, we have James Cook. Now, this is under the assumption that he is still going to be dealing with this injury and may end up playing. First and foremost, it is a very difficult matchup taking on the Titans, only allowing 3.3 yards per carry on average. The fourth most difficult matchup at the position, only allowing 8.44 fantasy points per game on the ground. And based on how well Ray Davis played on Monday night yesterday, we are anticipating that Ray Davis may have a role within this backfield going forward, especially as James Cook is trying to get back to 100%. If James Cook doesn't play, Ray Davis can be plugged in within a top 26 potential ranking. But until then, James Cook in this conversation, if he's available to start, obviously dealing with that turf toe injury, if he's available for us, he'd start at a top 24 capacity, even in a difficult matchup. Number 25, we have Najee Harris. The Najee Harris breakout has begun. Like I talked to you guys about earlier this season on multiple occasions, but again, once again, this time last week, I talked about it. In 2022, from weeks 6 through 18, Najee Harris averaged 13.2 fantasy points per game. In 2023, from week 7 through 18, averaged 12.5 fantasy points per game. Once you get to about week 6, 7, over the course of the last 3 years, including this season, which of course, in week 6, Najee Harris coming off of a 19-point performance, when we find ourselves in these situations where we get to about week 6, Najee Harris really begins to find himself an abundance of success. And now that we're hearing that Russell Wilson is most likely going to be the starting quarterback, unfortunately, of the Pittsburgh Steelers, for those of us who have Najee Harris, this is a good thing. That's less rushing upside from a quarterback scramble or a QB designed run that is going to steal attempts away from Najee Harris down in the red zone, which is only going to continue to elevate him and may even increase his overall receiving upside within this backfield based on the checkdowns that we have seen. Last season, the Denver Broncos with Russell Wilson, they were number one amongst all teams in running back targets. So if the check down is going to be there, certainly going to elevate Najee Harris. Taking on the Jets, a defense that just allowed 131 to back up running backs of the Buffalo Bills and 123 to Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin a couple weeks back, we are anticipating success once again from Najee Harris. Number 26, we have Tyrone Tracy Jr. of the New York Giants. Now, this is under the assumption that Devin Singletary doesn't play and is still dealing with a groin injury. If Devin Singletary is given the designation that he's going to play, I'd lower both of their overall rankings, but still have them both in the top 40. I am hoping that the efforts of Tyrone Tracy over the course of the last 2 games, in which he has found himself over 100 all-purpose yards in both games, I'm hoping that 23 total touches, 17 on the ground, 6 through the air, an incredible overall performance of 19.7 fantasy points is going to give him more workload going forward and potentially overtake this backfield and become the clear and away number 1 starter. Taking on the Eagles this week, he has an opportunity of finding a lot of success, especially considering the Eagles are allowing 5.0 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs thus far this season. Again, this is very much so speculatory. We're going to have to wait and see the status of Devin Singletary and how this backfield, of course, shakes out. Moving on, we have our number 27, Rhamondre Stevenson. Again, I'm hoping that he returns within the overall matchup. They will be playing in London, 6 a.m. PST. I will be live streaming again here on this channel. 30 minutes before the start of that game. Of course, we're going to be answering questions like we do every single Sunday morning, so be sure to swing on by. But again, they play a London game. Hopefully, we'll know the status prior to the game. The Patriots, this last week with Drake May, again, 21 rushing attempts and 6 targets for their running backs. If we go ahead and give a vast majority of that to Rhamondre Stevenson, taking on Jacksonville in a potential neutral game script, we should see a lot more rushing potential in an offense that with Drake May elevating their offensive potential, it will lead to more rushing opportunity considering they won't be getting blown out as quickly as they have over the course of the last couple weeks with Jacoby Brissett. This is a middle-of-the-pack matchup. They're allowing 13 fantasy points per game on the ground. Stevenson should be implicated, if healthy, for a solid week. Number 28, we have Austin Ekeler. I do believe that Austin Ekeler is going to outproduce the number 28 overall spot. Let me tell you why. Over the course of this season thus far, Austin Ekeler has put up over 8 fantasy points every single week in a half PPR. In a full PPR, he's produced 10 plus fantasy points every single game. Now, even though he is coming off a performance in which he only had 21 rushing yards on 9 attempts in the absence of Bijan Robinson Jr., it was a disadvantageous matchup, one of the most difficult at the position. Now he has an opportunity of taking on the Panthers, quite literally the best matchup at the position, in which we have seen in the last 3 games, Roschon Johnson, DeAndre Swift, Chase Brown, Zack Moss, Bijan Robinson, and Tyler Algier, all 6 running backs score over 14.5 fantasy points within their given games. Every single running back in that overall conversation we just had all scored touchdowns in the last 3 weeks against this defense. Some of them scored multiple touchdowns. Roschon, Bijan, and even Chase Brown. Therefore, we're anticipating Austin Ekeler to still find himself in the end zone within the week and definitely probably outproduce the number 28 spot, depending on how everything shakes out. Moving on to our number 29, we have Nick Chubb. Again, Nick Chubb, last week we got a report that said that he was going to be active this week, taking on the Cincinnati Bengals, which again, is an advantageous matchup. It's kind of a matchup that you'd want to fire him up against, a defense that he's familiar with, a defense that has struggled in terms of stopping the run. Again, Tyrone Tracy just went for nearly 20 fantasy points against that defense. The Bengals nearly allowing 16.5 fantasy points per game, the 8th best matchup at the position. So if we're going to go ahead and take how this Browns offense has approached the running game as of late, again, thus far this season, averaging 16.8 rushing attempts per game and 6.12 targets per game. If Nick Chubb is going to be given the vast majority of the overall touches, considering Jerome Ford sustained a hamstring injury last week, and his only backfield competition is Deontay Foreman and Pierre Strong, I would anticipate that Nick Chubb, that has had himself, or going into this game, is going to be off of 3 consecutive weeks of full practices. I would anticipate that Nick Chubb should be given the vast majority of overall touches and should be a solid option as an RB3 going into the given week. We'll just have to see how efficient he can be within his rushing attempts, considering how beat up this offensive line has been this season. Number 30, we have Alexander Mattison. Now, if in fact Jahmyr White does potentially return in week 7, I don't think that actually hurts Alexander Mattison. Sure, that leads to less rushing attempts overall, but he hasn't really been efficient over the course of the last 2 games anyway with his overall attempts. 29 attempts for 71 yards, 2.45 yards per carry on average, not great numbers. Honestly, where Alexander Mattison finds himself value, the receiving game, coming off of a week in which he had 5 receptions, but additionally, vulturing touchdowns, which he certainly is going to be capable of doing so for another consecutive week. Taking on the Rams, the 3rd best matchup at the position, you would assume that Alexander Mattison, regardless of the return of Jahmyr White, would still be relevant within the overall negative game script. Moving on to our number 31, we have Javonte Williams. Now, here's the fact of the matter. Javonte Williams has been very inefficient this season. That being said, he's still coming off of a week in week 6 in which he played 67% of the offensive snaps. And the game got out of hand relatively quickly and was 20-0 at halftime. So with that all taken into account, there is a possibility going into this week where we'll see a far more advantageous neutral game script, considering the New Orleans Saints don't have Shaheed, potentially will not have Olave, and do not have Derek Carr. With Spencer Rattler at the quarterback position, 2 rookie quarterbacks taking on each other, regardless of how slowly these teams start, both teams are going to be running the ball. Both defense cannot stop the run. The Saints, they're allowing the 10th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, over 16 per game, just off of rushing statistics alone. Additionally, 5.37 yards per carry on average, the number 1 at that overall category. This is the best matchup that Javonte Williams could possibly ask for. Now, even though we don't love Javonte Williams within the overall position, mainly because, again, that offense as a whole isn't really trustworthy, he is still in line for at least a top 31 overall standing within the given week. Number 32, we have Raheem Mostert. Again, Raheem Mostert is going to benefit off the matchup. The last time we saw him out, even though he did get himself a boost of overall opportunity because of the concussion protocol that Achane was in, 19 carries, 2 receptions, a total of 98 total yards, 10.8 fantasy points, and a half PPR. This week, taking on the Colts should be a cakewalk. Again, we just most recently saw Will Levis throw for 95 yards in that game, and the Titans running backs still accumulate 122 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. If we're going to be in a situation where Tyler Huntley throws for 120 yards and both Achane and Mostert are going to be relevant within the running game, considering how advantageous the matchup is, again, top 32, not a bad spot for Mostert. Moving on to our number 33 and our number 34. I'm going to go ahead and pair them together because the fact of the matter is, Bucky, Irving, Rachaad White, we're going to have to wait and see whether or not Rachaad White is healthy. This week, both of them are in a blender of a matchup that really isn't going to pan out well for them, taking on the Baltimore Ravens, one of the, if not the best run-stop defense in the league as of this current moment in time, obviously allowing the fewest yards per carry on average, less than 3, to opposing running backs. Thus far this season, we have only seen 2 running backs find any sort of success against this defense, and they have accumulated Pacheco 45 rushing yards and Chase Brown 46 rushing yards. If that is the upside of performances in that circumstance, we either are going to need to get a guaranteed touchdown from one of these two, or going to have to get a guarantee of a lot of receiving upside, which again, both of them are implicated within the overall region. Depending on Rachaad White's health, we're going to have to keep that monitored. He is technically the preferred receiving back of the backfield. So as we progress, we'll keep an eye on that and rank it accordingly. Again, do not forget, ranking subject to change, but I don't like either of the two within the matchup this week. Moving on to our number 35, we have Antonio Gibson, who, even though he wasn't very much so efficient in the absence of Rhamondre Stevenson, was still given ample opportunity. 13 on the ground, 3 through the air. Now, as the number 2 back of this team going forward, most likely, with the return of Rhamondre Stevenson, I do anticipate, Antonio Gibson to still be relevant, with Drake May presenting more of an offensive boost and more rushing opportunity in a neutral game script. There should be opportunities for Antonio Gibson, whether it's on the ground or through the air, to be relevant in this overall offense. The funny thing is, since being named like the starting running back, he has been a less efficient overall back than when he was the overall backup within this offense. Obviously, many of factors, the offensive line and all the injuries, definitely making an impact in that overall circumstance. Moving on to our number 36, Zack Moss. Like I mentioned earlier with Chase Brown, it's over. This is the first time this season where Chase Brown has outsnapped him, and obviously they do not prefer to utilize Zack Moss because he is the lesser of the two in regards to overall efficiency when given opportunity. Now, it doesn't mean that Zack Moss is going to be absent of overall opportunity. He's going to get a couple touches here and there, but he would require a touchdown to be anything more than a low-end RB3, or would require that Chase Brown is still dealing with a quad injury, and that would have to be something that kind of forces them to play more Zack Moss within the upcoming matchup. Otherwise, I don't anticipate to see much more Zack Moss as we continue. Moving on to our number 37, this is going to begin the streak of players that we mentioned in yesterday's video in regards to waiver wire pickups. Ray Davis, again, even if we get James Cook playing, you got to remember, 12 of his 20 rushing attempts yesterday were 4 or more yards. Also had a huge play down the field as a reception. It is a difficult matchup, but nonetheless, if in fact you have James Cook, pick up Ray Davis to have your handcuff ready to go. Moving on to the next player, we have Isaac Guerendo, who again, if in fact we get into a situation where there is no Jordan Mason, remember that Guerendo's coming off a week of 10 carries for 99. Now sure, a lot of his overall carries were inefficient, but throughout an entire game, behind this offensive line, within the scheme, still a relevant option in the absence of Jordan Mason. And even if Jordan Mason's still healthy, could still be a relevant option if they want to limit his overall touches to keep him healthy. Moving on to our number 39, Tyler Algier, coming off of the best week of his overall season, 19 total touches, over 19 fantasy points, scored himself a touchdown, but that is most likely going to be his best game of the season going forward, mainly because, again, you're never going to take on Carolina until week 18. So for fantasy purposes, we won't have an upside like that once again. Either way, they do take on the Seahawks, the 9th best matchup, over allowing 5.27 yards per carry on average. And considering Algier's getting about 8 touches per game on average, if he sees himself like 7 attempts, 2 receptions overall, could still be a top 40 running back based on his overall efficiency as of late, in the fact that the Seahawks cannot stop the run and are often finding themselves in negative game scripts over the course of the last 3 weeks. Moving on to the final option, as our top 40 running back, number 40, we have Emanuel Wilson. Emanuel Wilson has been highly efficient with his overall touches, and quite frankly, going forward, as long as they continue to give him these touches, he is going to be relevant for fantasy purposes. Again, we may have the eventual return of Marshawn Lloyd. We're going to have to wait and see, but until then, Emanuel Wilson. I could have put Jaylen Warren here, mainly because of the quarterback switch to, of course, Russell Wilson, maybe more receiving upside, but either way, I like the top 40 rankings. Again, do not forget the rankings are subject to change. If you guys want my updated rankings for the remainder of the season, like I mentioned earlier, check out Underdog. Sign up today using code Andrew. Get those rankings every single Sunday. Or you can check out the Patreon if you are not eligible to sign up via Underdog and want my rankings every Thursday and Sunday, and to ask me unlimited questions over the course of the week. Outside of that, thank you everybody for watching. We'll be back tomorrow and of course later tonight via live stream. Thank you everybody for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.